The conversation was supposed to be about celebration, about a 20-year-old kid from Italy who had just extended his lead in the Formula One World Championship, about a homecoming that would have every single tifosi in Monza painted red and roaring his name from the historic banking to the Parabolica. Instead, Toto Wolff leaned into the microphone after the sprint in Zandvoort and dropped a bombshell that sent shockwaves through the paddock that you could feel all the way across the Atlantic. Kimi is going to probably lose some in Monza starting in the back, he said, with the kind of casual resignation that only comes when you've already accepted the inevitable. Wait, hold on, rewind that. Starting in the back. At Monza, in front of 100,000 screaming Italian fans who have waited decades for a homegrown talent to challenge for the World Championship. This wasn't supposed to be the story. This was supposed to be the coronation. But now, the championship leader is facing a grid penalty that could completely rewrite the trajectory of his season. And Mercedes is playing a game of chess while everyone else is still figuring out how to move the pawns. Here's what we know, or at least what we think we know, because in Formula One, information is currency, and nobody spends it freely. Kimi Antonelli, the 20-year-old phenomenon who has taken the F1 world by storm in his debut season with Mercedes, will be taking a grid penalty at the Italian Grand Prix, his home race, the one event on the calendar where every single spot on the grid matters more than anywhere else. The one race where starting from the back isn't just a strategic disadvantage, it's practically a death sentence for victory aspirations. But this isn't some simple one-place penalty for a minor infraction. No, this is the kind of penalty that makes team principals lose sleep and drivers stare at the ceiling at 3 in the morning. The kind that can transform a championship battle from a comfortable lead into a knife fight in a phone booth. Let me take you back to how we got here, because the path to this moment is far more interesting than just a simple rule violation. Each driver in Formula One is permitted a strictly limited number of power unit components for the entire season. It's like being given a certain number of matches and being told you have to survive a whole winter without running out. You can use them wisely, you can stretch them beyond their intended lifespan, but eventually the law of diminishing returns catches up with you. For Antonelli, the mathematics have become brutally simple. 2 separate technical issues with his power unit earlier in the season have forced Mercedes into a corner where they have no choice but to exceed the limit before the season is over. The question isn't if, it's when. And they've chosen when. Now, here's where the strategy comes into play. And this is where things get genuinely fascinating. Teams generally try to time these penalties for circuits where overtaking is easier. You don't want to take a penalty at Monaco, where passing is virtually impossible. You want to take it somewhere like Monza, where the long straights and high speeds theoretically make it easier to slice through the field. But there's a catch. Monza is high speed, yes, but it's also notoriously difficult to overtake in the modern era. The dirty air, the DRS zones that might not be as effective as they seem, the sheer chaos of the first lap when everyone is fighting for position. This isn't a simple math equation. This is a gamble wrapped in a strategy, wrapped in a prayer. The reports coming out of the Mercedes camp suggest that Kimi Antonelli is likely facing a minimum of a 10-place grid penalty. But here's the thing that nobody is saying out loud. The severity of the penalty depends entirely on how many components Mercedes decides to install. If they're smart, if they're really playing the long game, they could theoretically install enough parts to trigger a penalty that sends him all the way to the back of the grid. And if they do that, they might as well be putting him in a position where he needs to perform a miracle just to score points, let alone win the race. But Toto Wolff isn't stupid. He knows exactly what he's doing. What makes this situation even more electric, even more dramatic, is the context surrounding it. Kimi Antonelli, who just turned 20 years old on the week of this report, holds a 53-point lead over Lewis Hamilton at the top of the driver standings. Let that sink in for a moment. A 20-year-old kid leading the World Championship over a 7-time world champion. He extended that lead by finishing 4th in the Dutch Grand Prix sprint on Saturday, which might not sound like much until you realize that every single point in a championship battle matters. Every point could be the difference between glory and the crushing weight of coming second. And now, that lead is about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. But here's where the narrative gets even more fascinating. And if you think the Antonelli situation is dramatic, wait until you hear about George Russell. The Brit managed to close the championship deficit to his teammate to 56 points by winning that very same sprint in Zandvoort. 56 points. That's nothing in the grand scheme of a Formula One season. That's a couple of bad races, a strategic error, a safety car that doesn't go your way. And here's the kicker. Russell is in exactly the same position regarding power unit parts used. He's sitting on the same ticking bomb. He's going to need to take a penalty before the end of the season, as well. But neither Mercedes nor Russell have given any indication of where or when. He'll take his penalty, and that uncertainty, that ambiguity, that's where the real story is hiding. Now, I want you to consider the psychological weight of what's about to happen. Kimi Antonelli is 20 years old. He's leading the World Championship. He's about to race in front of his home crowd at Monza, a circuit that has seen some of the most legendary moments in F1 history. And the moment he arrives, the moment he puts his helmet on and steps into that car, he knows he's starting from the back. He knows that every single position he gains will be a battle. He knows that the championship lead he's worked so hard to build could be eroded in a single Sunday afternoon. The pressure on this kid is absolutely immense. But here's the thing about pressure. It either crushes you or it forges you into something stronger. And everything we've seen from Antonelli this season suggests he's the type of driver who thrives in adversity. Let me give you some context about just how monumental a feat it is for a 20-year-old to be leading the World Championship. The last time someone this young was in this position, we were talking about drivers who would go on to become legends of the sport. The weight of expectation, the pressure of performance, the constant scrutiny from the media and the fans. It's enough to break veterans, let alone a kid who's barely old enough to legally drink in some countries. But Antonelli has handled everything thrown at him with a maturity that seems almost unnatural. And now he's facing his biggest test yet. But before we get too caught up in the drama of the Italian Grand Prix, let's not forget what's happening right now in Zandvoort. The Dutch Grand Prix is upon us, and the championship battle is reaching its boiling point. The weekend schedule is packed with action, from the F1 Academy to the Porsche Super Cup, all building toward that main event on Sunday afternoon. Every session, every lap, every tenth of a second matters. And in the background, lurking like a shadow, is the knowledge that whatever happens in Zandvoort, the real story is waiting in Monza. What I find most fascinating about this entire situation is the way Mercedes is handling it. They're not trying to hide the penalty. They're not pretending it's not going to happen. Toto Wolff practically announced it from the rooftops after the sprint in Zandvoort. "We need big points," he said. "Kimi is going to probably lose some in Monza starting in the back, so hopefully we can pocket some here." There's a strategy in that honesty. By being transparent about what's coming, they're controlling the narrative. They're telling the world that this penalty is a calculated decision, not a panic reaction to a failure. They're making it clear that they've weighed the options, analyzed the data, and made the choice they believe gives them the best possible chance at the championship. But let's dig deeper into the actual mechanics of what's happening. The penalty Antonelli faces is not just a simple one-size-fits-all punishment. The severity will depend on exactly how many components Mercedes decides to replace. If they go conservative and just replace the bare minimum, he's looking at a 10-place grid penalty. That's significant, but it's not insurmountable, especially at a circuit like Monza, where the slipstream and the DRS zones can theoretically help a faster car carve through the field. But if Mercedes decides to go all in and replace multiple parts, Antonelli could be looking at starting from the back of the grid, dead last, and that changes everything. Consider the mathematics of a back-of-the-grid start at Monza. Even if Antonelli has the fastest car on the grid, even if he's the most talented driver of his generation, he's still going to be caught in the chaos of the midfield. He's going to be fighting for position with cars that are slower but harder to pass. He's going to be vulnerable to incidents, to collisions, to the unpredictable nature of racing in traffic. And every lap he spends fighting through the field is a lap where Lewis Hamilton or George Russell is building a lead at the front. 53 points might seem like a comfortable advantage now, but after a back-of-the-grid start at Monza, that lead could evaporate faster than you can blink. Now here's something that's not being discussed nearly enough in the mainstream coverage. The timing of this penalty couldn't be worse for Antonelli, but it couldn't be better for Mercedes as a team. Think about it. By taking the penalty at Monza, they're effectively absorbing a calculated hit in a race they know they'll face tough competition anyway. They're effectively sacrificing one race for the sake of preserving their competitiveness across the rest of the season. It's the kind of strategic decision that championship-winning teams make, the kind that looks painful in the short term but pays dividends in the long run. It's the kind of decision that separates good teams from great teams. But there's another layer to this story that I think is genuinely fascinating. Look at the reaction from Marco Antonelli, Kimi's father. Speaking to Sky Sports F1 before the start of the sprint in Zandvoort, he hinted at what was coming with a cryptic comment that revealed more than he probably intended. Monza, we will see. It will be difficult, for sure, for a lot of reasons. That's not just a father talking about his son's race prospects. That's someone who knows exactly what's coming. Someone who has probably had countless conversations behind closed doors about the weight of what's about to happen. The Antonelli family is Italian. They know what Monza means. They know what it means to race in front of the tifosi. And they know what it means to do it from the back of the grid. I want to take a moment to talk about Monza itself. Monza actually represents in the context of Italian motorsport. This is the temple of speed. This is where legends are made and legacies are defined. The history of this circuit is written in the blood, sweat, and tears of the greatest drivers who ever lived. And now, a 20-year-old Italian who grew up dreaming of winning this very race is going to have to do it from the absolute worst starting position imaginable. The irony is almost too cruel to comprehend. Let me paint you a picture of what's going to happen when Antonelli rolls onto the grid in Monza. The crowd will be going absolutely insane. The Italian flag will be everywhere. The noise will be deafening, and the whole world will be watching to see if this kid can overcome the odds and do something that would become the stuff of legend. If he wins from the back of the grid at Monza, they'll be telling stories about it for generations. If he doesn't, well, the narrative will be very different. The pressure is immense, the stakes are enormous, and the outcome is anything but certain. Now let's talk about George Russell's situation, because I think it's being overshadowed by the Antonelli drama, and that's a mistake. Russell reduced his championship deficit to 56 points by winning the sprint in Zandvoort. 56 points isn't a massive gap in Formula One, especially when you consider that there are still plenty of races left in the season. If Russell can maintain his current form and capitalize on Antonelli's penalty at Monza, the championship picture could look very different by the time the European season ends. But here's the catch. Russell also needs to take a penalty at some point. His power unit components are being used at roughly the same rate as Antonelli's. The ticking clock is ticking for both of them, and how Mercedes manages this dual threat could be the defining factor of their championship bid. What I find genuinely intriguing about Russell's position is the uncertainty surrounding it. Neither Mercedes nor Russell have given any indication of where he'll take his penalty. It's a strategic ambiguity that keeps everyone guessing. Is he going to take it at Monza as well? Is he going to wait for a different circuit? Is he going to try and stretch his components as far as possible and risk a technical failure? Every option carries its own set of risks and rewards, and the decision Russell makes could have just as much impact on the championship as anything Antonelli does. Think about the team dynamic here. You have two drivers who are both championship contenders. Both are facing penalties. Both are fighting for every single point, and the team has to manage both situations without creating any perception of favoritism or unfair treatment. It's a tightrope walk that would make a circus performer nervous. Toto Wolff has to be the ringmaster, the referee, and the strategist all at once, and any misstep could have consequences that ripple through the entire organization. Let me shift gears and talk about the broader context of Formula One's power unit regulations. These rules were designed to create parity, to stop the richest teams from having an insurmountable advantage by simply replacing components at will. But they've also created this fascinating chess game where teams have to decide when to take their medicine. It's like being in a poker game where you know you're going to have to fold eventually, but you're trying to pick the exact right moment to do it. The teams that master this part of the sport are often the ones celebrating at the end of the season. And here's what makes Antonelli's situation particularly delicate. He's the championship leader. He has the most to lose. Every time he takes a penalty, every time he starts from the back of the grid, he's risking everything he's built over the course of the season. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. The constant uncertainty, the knowledge that at any moment your advantage could be wiped out, the pressure of knowing that your rivals are just waiting for you to make a mistake. It takes a special kind of mindset to handle that kind of pressure, and Antonelli has shown he has that mindset, so far. But here's the thing. The season isn't over. There are still races to be won, points to be scored, and titles to be decided. And the grid penalty at Monza is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. How Mercedes manages the situation, how Antonelli responds, and how Russell capitalizes on this teammate's misfortune are all going to be key storylines that define the remainder of the season. I think it's worth considering what this means for the championship mathematically. With a 53-point lead, Antonelli has a cushion, but that cushion can disappear quickly. A 10-place grid penalty at Monza, even in the best-case scenario, probably means he's going to be battling for lower points positions. Maybe 5th, maybe 6th, maybe even lower if things go wrong. And if Russell or Hamilton wins the race, that's a significant swing in the championship standings. The gap could go from 53 points to something much, much smaller. And then you have to consider the races after Monza. Will Antonelli be on the back foot for the rest of the season? Will he have to take more penalties? These are questions that don't have easy answers. Let me also address the elephant in the room. Monza is the Italian Grand Prix. It's the home race for Antonelli. The pressure of racing in front of your home crowd is immense even when everything is going perfectly. When you're starting from the back of the grid, that pressure is magnified exponentially. Every single Italian fan in that stadium will be watching him. Every single journalist, commentator, and pundit will be analyzing his every move. The weight of a nation's expectations will be on his shoulders. And he's 20 years old. Now, I want to talk about the reliability aspect of all this. Power unit components aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're real pieces of engineering that can fail in spectacular fashion. Antonelli has already had 2 separate technical issues this season. That's more than most drivers. And every component you push past its intended lifespan carries an increased risk of catastrophic failure. Mercedes is gambling that they can time these penalties perfectly. But what if they're wrong? What if a component fails during a race and forces a retirement? That would be a disaster of epic proportions, the kind of disaster that could decide a championship. And then there's the human element. These drivers are athletes, but they're also human beings. They're not robots. The pressure of a championship battle, the weight of expectation, the knowledge that one mistake could cost you everything, it takes a toll. And Antonelli is just 20 years old. He's still developing as a driver, as a person, as a competitor. How he handles this adversity will tell us everything we need to know about his potential to become a future world champion. You know what I find really interesting about this whole situation? The way it's been handled by the media. There's been very little speculation about whether Mercedes made the right decision or whether they should have done things differently. The story has been presented as a fait accompli, something that had to happen regardless of the consequences. But is that really the case? Could Mercedes have managed their power unit allocation better? Could they have avoided this situation entirely? These are questions that don't have simple answers, but they're questions worth asking. Let's also consider the competitive landscape. Ferrari has been strong at Monza historically. The tifosi will be out in full force, and the red cars will be pushing hard for a victory in front of their home crowd. McLaren has shown impressive pace this season. Red Bull is always a threat. Mercedes isn't the only team that wants to win this race, and starting from the back of the grid, Antonelli will have to fight through all of them. It's not just about managing his own race, it's about managing the races of everyone around him. One mistake, one contact, one moment of lost concentration, and the entire weekend could go up in smoke. And what about the qualifying session? If Antonelli knows he's going to take a penalty anyway, does he push for a high qualifying position? Does he save his tires and his engine for the race? Does he treat qualifying as a practice session or as a genuine opportunity to start as far forward as possible? These are strategic decisions that have to be made in advance, and they're decisions that could have a significant impact on the race outcome. Now, let me get into something that I think is genuinely fascinating about this story: the timing of the penalty announcement. Toto Wolff didn't wait until the week of the Italian Grand Prix to break this news. He didn't try to keep it a secret and spring it on the paddock at the last minute. He came out and said it after the sprint in Zandvoort, giving everyone plenty of time to process the information. That's a deliberate strategy. By being transparent, he's controlling the narrative. He's taking away the element of surprise and turning it into a strategic masterstroke. It's the kind of move that makes people respect your leadership even when they disagree with your decisions. But let's be real here. There's a part of this that feels like a betrayal. Not on Mercedes' part, but on the part of circumstance. The idea that the championship leader, a 20-year-old Italian, has to take a grid penalty at his home race, the one he's probably dreamed about since he was a kid, feels almost unjust. It's the kind of thing that would make you believe in cosmic cruelty. But this is Formula One. And in Formula One, you deal with the hand you're dealt. You don't complain about it. You find a way to win anyway. I want to bring it back to the Dutch Grand Prix for a moment, because what happens in Zandvoort is going to set the tone for everything that follows. If Antonelli can score big points in the Netherlands, he'll have a bigger cushion heading into Monza. If he has a difficult weekend, that cushion shrinks and the pressure in Monza becomes even more immense. The connections between these races are not just temporal, they're causal. Every result creates the conditions for the next result. Every point scored or lost changes the calculus of the championship battle. Now, let me bring this to a close by saying this. The Italian Grand Prix at Monza is going to be one of the most memorable races in recent memory. The grid penalty for Kimi Antonelli has created a storyline that's going to captivate the entire Formula One world. Whether you're a fan of Antonelli, a fan of Mercedes, or just a fan of great racing, this is a race you're not going to want to miss. It's going to have everything: drama, passion, incredible racing, and a young driver who's determined to overcome the odds. I can't wait to watch it, and I hope you'll be watching too.